Jim here with Prevelo Bikes, and today we're going to show you how to assemble your Alpha 3, 4, and 5 bicycle. Alright, so let's go ahead and open the box and pull our bike out. So I just have a regular pair of scissors. It's going to get the straps. You can also use a box cutter for this. Pull the bike out, and then I like to do this on a table. You can also do it on the ground if you prefer. Now we're just going to go ahead and remove the packing material from the bike. Now we're ready to start the assembly process. So I have my parts box opened up here. So in this box you're going to find the pedals, the front wheel skewer, a set of reflectors, the tools needed to assemble the bike, which are a 4, 5, and 6 millimeter Allen key, and then you'll have your owner's manual and assembly instructions. Now the first thing that I like to assemble is the handlebars. So we want to mount those onto the bike. To do that we're going to use a 4 millimeter Allen key. Okay, so I have our bike resting upright here, which just makes the install of the handlebar a little bit easier. So with our 4 millimeter Allen key, we're going to unscrew the 4 faceplate bolts, and then you can just set the bolts aside. Please note that there is a small lock washer on each bolt. Just make sure that stays with the bolt. And then remove the faceplate. I like to leave one bolt in for when I install the handlebar back in. Okay, lift the handlebar into position. Now you want to make sure that all the cables maintain a smooth path. So the front brake cable sits out front, and it's going to just have a nice path straight into the front brake. The rear brake and the shifter cable are going to go around the frame. Okay, so make sure that you don't have a cable wrapped behind the stem. The handlebars aren't turned backwards or anything like that. The handlebars should have the logo out front. The brake levers should point forward. Once you have everything into position, you can lift up your faceplate, and I start threading in one bolt, and you can use your Allen key. If you have it set in the long orientation, not as an L, it's a little bit easier to put the bolts in. And then you kind of have to work your way around the cables here. And just get each bolt installed one by one. You can notice that I'm not tightening the bolts all the way yet. I'm just starting to get them threaded in. Okay, now that each bolt is started, I can start kind of tightening everything down. So it's important when you tighten a stem, you want to tighten it in an X pattern. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can start at any bolt, just make sure that you maintain an X. Also, while you tighten it down, you want to pay attention to the gap at the bottom and the top of the stem. So right now you can see the bottom is basically pinched shut while the top is nice and wide. So while you tighten it, you want to watch that gap and try to make sure that it stays even. And this is just to apply even pressure as it's tightening. It basically protects the stem. If you over tighten it, you can break the stem. It's very rare for someone to do that on one of these bikes, but it is possible. Okay, so I got that first bolt on the top left. Now I'm working on the bottom right. So I'm not torquing them all the way down yet. I'm just doing this to get the stem plate adjusted evenly, so to maintain that even gap that we talked about. Alright, so now all 4 bolts are threaded in. I'm just going to check that gap and make sure everything's nice and even. The handlebar is centered, so now that it's just snug, I can kind of get it centered out. And now I want to adjust the angle of the bar. So the brake levers should sit at about 45 degrees from level ground, and the bar should kind of point up so that the bend in the bar will slope up. You don't want the bar leaned way back like this or leaned way forward. You want to have it kind of positioned in the middle to where the bend goes up, and then the brake levers sit about 45 degrees from level ground. Now I'm ready to go ahead and torque the bolts on the stem. Okay? So just going to snug it up a little bit more. I'm still making sure that I maintain that gap. Make sure everything's nice and even. And now that everything's basically as tight as I can make it with the Allen key in this position, I'm going to turn it to get a little bit more leverage on the bolts. And this Allen key is small on purpose. It's to help make sure that you don't over tighten the stem. Now you want to tighten the stem down to about 5 Newton meters, which is tight, but it's not like absolutely insane. It's hard to describe if you're not familiar with torque wrenches, but really it's going to be about as tight as you can get it with this wrench without just going crazy. I'm just working my way around to make sure that everything's nice and tight. But because of that equal pressure that you want to get around the stem, it's possible for you to kind of tighten all the bolts and then one of them basically gets loose as the faceplate pushes in. So now that we tightened all the way around, we're good to go and we can move on to the next step. So now I'm going to prepare to install the front wheel, but in order to get the wheel in, we're going to need to disconnect this brake. So right now there's this chrome, we're going to call it a noodle, and then into this little box, which is a noodle holder. So what we want to do, I'm going to grab the noodle and then just push and open up the brake just like this. So the cable itself, there's a little slot in the noodle holder here. So that cable can slide in and out of the slot, and then the noodle, it's just going to slide into position. And this larger surface here is what actually locks it into place. Okay, so now with the brake opened up, we're going to go ahead and get ready to install our wheel. Now we're going to get our bike into position to install the front wheel. So I like to flip the bike upside down so that it's resting on the seat and the handlebars. And then get your front wheel ready. And what you want to do is pay attention to the tread pattern. So the tread actually kind of points like an arrow. If you look at the rear tire, you can see which way it points, and you want to match the front to the rear. So in this case, the arrow is always going to point forward, but since the bike is upside down, it's actually going to point backwards. There's also on the side of the tire, there's a little, it says direction, and then there's the little arrow that points forward. We're going to go ahead and just drop our wheel down into the dropouts. Now with our front wheel rested into place, we're going to go ahead and install our front skewer. So on these skewers, one side is a nut, the other side is where your 5mm Allen key gets inserted. So on the nut side, we're just going to unscrew the nut and set it aside. You can remove the warning label. And then there's going to be 2 springs. So one spring is going to slide off, the other spring will stay in place. So these springs are tapered. One side is large, one side is small. The small side is going to face the inside of the bike. The large side is going to face the outside of the bike. Okay. Now hold one spring in your hand, the other spring is staying on, and then the skewer is going to get inserted into the non-drive side. So the Allen key will face out just like this. So if you look at the Allen key, the same position as the rear. So the Allens are on this side of the bike. The chainring will be on the other side. Okay. Now with the spring, you can slide the spring onto the skewer and then thread your nut. So since there's a spring on this side, you're going to want to push in with your thumb and then thread the nut into place. But then just go ahead and thread that nut as far as you can by hand. Then it's going to want to start rotating this side. So once you get to that point, you can grab your 5mm Allen key. And when you insert this in, I like to leave it so the long handle is out. If you put it in this way, you're not going to get enough torque to really tighten it down. So the torque spec on this is 10 Newton meters. You'll see it printed on there. 10 Newton meters is pretty tight. So we'll start getting it started. Hold the nut with one hand, and once it's snug enough, that nut will hold itself into place. And then you can just go ahead and torque it down. So if you really get it pretty tight, and there you go, the front wheel is installed. Now we did this with the bike upside down to let gravity push the wheel all the way into the fork. If you do this with the bike right side up, the wheel can start to kind of shake from side to side, which means it won't be centered in the fork, which will mean the brake is going to rub. Okay, so doing this upside down ensures the wheel is all the way in the dropouts. All right, so now we're ready to reconnect our brake. Now remember, this little chrome noodle needs to go back into the noodle holder. So what I'm going to do, I'm holding this with my right hand, and I have this finger free to be able to move the noodle up and down. So that's just my right index finger. And then get the cable lined into the slot, and then we're just going to slide that right into place there. Okay. So this large piece is going to slide right in, and the cable is going to slide through the little slot, and then it'll end up resting on this larger portion of the noodle. Okay, so slide that right into place. And then this is just a little dust boot. So the little black boot, that's just going to slide right on. And then if your cable is sticking out like this is just a hazard. It can be annoying, and a kid can hit their leg on it, and the same with the rear. So if this is sticking out, you can just tuck it right beneath this little tab or behind the brake spring. If it really ends up becoming a problem and it keeps poking out, you can always add a little zip tie there. Then with it connected, pull your brake, and you want to make sure that both arms are moving evenly. And if you lift it and spin the wheel, that the brake is not rubbing either side of the brake pad. Now we're ready for the final step of assembly, which is installing the pedals. So pedals are right and left specific, and that's because your left pedal is opposite threaded. So instead of your typical righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, the left pedal is going to be lefty-tighty. Okay? So I'm going to grab our right pedal, which is indicated with an R, which is going to match the right side crank arm, which is also labeled with an R, and start to get it threaded into place. So you usually can't just spin the pedal. You'll need to hold on where the wrench is going to go. So rotate the pedal righty-tighty. If you also hold that portion, if you back pedal the bike, the pedal is going to thread itself into place. That will also work with the left. So your left pedal, remember lefty-tighty, so spin it to the left. And then if you hold that little portion while you back pedal the bike, it will thread itself into place. Now the way these pedals tighten down is pretty unique. Usually the wrench is going to go here, and it'll be like a crescent wrench. But in this case, it's going to be a 6mm Allen key, which is going to be inserted through the back side. So get that Allen key into place, and make sure that when you put it into place, you're going to have your hand on the long portion. So the short portion will actually go into the pedal. And then pedals need to be very tight. So in one direction, the back wheel is going to spin. In the other direction, it's going to want to rotate the crank. So I'm going to hold that wheel and then hold the wrench and push the wheel in the direction that makes the crank rotate while I also push the wrench. This allows me to use two forces to get these pedals very tight. So go ahead, get that as tight as you can, and then do the same thing with the other pedal. All right, now that our pedals are nice and tight, the assembly is complete. With the bike assembled, we just want to do a quick safety check before we put our little ones on the bike. So I'm going to use that 5mm Allen key that you use to tighten down the front wheel, and we're just going to check the rear skewer to make sure it's tight. Okay. And then the 4mm wrench that we use to install the handlebar, we're going to check the pinch bolts on the stem. Okay, and the pinch bolts are nice and tight. Grab the brakes, make sure the brakes operate and stop the bike as they should. And then just give the tires a pinch and make sure that they are firm and filled up to pressure. The PSI rating on these tires is 40 to 65. We usually ship these bikes out around 50 PSI, but over time, air does come out of the tire. So this is especially important if you wait a little while to assemble the bike. So 40 PSI at the minimum, 65 at the max. Right? Now that we have the bike assembled, we know that everything is safe. Just want to adjust the seat height for your little rider. All of our bikes use a quick release seat post clamp, so you can open up the seat post and then you can adjust the height range. You do want to note that on every seat post there's a minimum insertion rating. So that little line that you see there should always be down inside the frame. This is because you need enough seat post inside for it to clamp, and just because there's weight on the post so that it can't bend in one direction. Okay, so you can't just have the post like that. It has to be inserted to where the insertion line is hidden. Okay, so once you get the seat wherever you need it adjusted for your child, just make sure it's lined up. So line up the tip of the saddle with the top tube, and then tighten down the seat post clamp. If after you tighten it down, you can rotate the seat from side to side, there is a nut on the other side of the clamp from the lever. So if you open the lever, you can turn the nut to the right, and that will tighten it up. Okay. If you need to loosen it because it's so tight you can't close the clamp, you can turn that to the left. So you just need to find the balance of getting it tight enough to where you can close it, but the seat doesn't twist from side to side. And once you have the seat height dialed in, you know the bike is safe to ride, and your little one's ready to go. Thanks for watching. Enjoy.